Finally, we'd like to bring John Bozzella up. He is from Global Automakers, and we'll get your presentation all
Great.
ready to go.
Thank you, John. Are we done yet? We'll get there quickly. I promise we'll answer your questions. I'm going to add the regulatory perspective to the discussion, and I think it's many of you may be viewing this perspective as maybe sorely necessary by this point. Let me tell you a little bit about who we are first, if I can figure that out. I'm pressing the right button.
Right. That should have worked.
No, it's
No,
not.
maybe it's off. No?
Not working?
What'd you do?
I don't know.
It's an autonomous presentation.
It's exactly right. Well, we don't really need the presentation. We can. You want me to say next slide, please? Like the old days? Next slide, please. Okay. Next slide, please. No. There we go. Okay, now we're going.
It's this room full of technology.
There we
Yeah.
go. All right. Okay.
There you go.
Does it
All
work?
right. Yep.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So.
So just that button.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
So just a little bit about who we are. These are the companies we represent. This is an extremely competitive and innovative and growing sector of the U.S. auto industry. This group of companies, our members, they produce 41% of the cars that are produced in the United States of America. These companies produce in the United States 65% of what they sell here. And last year alone, these companies exported from U.S. factories almost 500,000 vehicles to over 60 countries around the world. So again, this is a snapshot of a very vibrant, competitive, and innovative U.S. auto industry. Let's talk about safety and safe drivers a little bit. I'm going to do a little bit of framing perspective, and I was thinking about showing you a few slides that will hopefully, help frame the discussion that policymakers, in the sense that policymakers have it. We talked a lot about auto safety already. Let's look at what the trend has been. What you see is vehicle miles traveled per capita over a snapshot of time from 1965. It's a good time to start. Anybody here read Unsafe at Any Speed? Okay, 1966, I think, right? To 2010. So this is DOT data. You may have seen this data used in a New York Times article, slightly different cut on the evolution of auto safety. But what I wanted to do here is kind of show you that the trend in terms of vehicle miles traveled per capita has largely been growing over time, right? You see a few dips here and there, recession, for example. And what's been happening with regard to auto fatalities, here described as auto fatalities per 100,000 people, have been going down over time. Now, is it perfect? Not by any means. And I think Jeff made an absolutely passionate and persuasive case for why we cannot stop, as did John. This continues. We can't stop until we get to zero. But you can see broadly that the trend is down. Well, why is this? I think you heard why this is already in one sense. It's vehicle technology, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But it's also driver behavior, it's also road conditions, and it's also public policies that have encouraged behavior, for example. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that intersection between vehicle technology and public policy. So this is my own sort of view of a sort of the journey over time, and John did a great job of talking about this, and from an engineering perspective and from a design and a research perspective. I want to talk about it a little bit from the public policy perspective. You've all heard this journey already from passive safety, right? And AutoLiv has really been a leader in this regard, as you know, seat belts and airbags. And my entry into the industry was during the airbag regulation period. So we've gone from passive to active, right? So we've heard about electronic stability control, crash avoidance, lane departure, those kinds of things. And we're now, so passive to active, we're now shifting from active to connected. Vehicle-to-vehicle technology, vehicle-to-infrastructure technologies, the ability for vehicles not only to communicate as they see one another through cameras, radar, LiDAR, et cetera, but when they don't. And then ultimately, again, from connected to autonomous. Now, the other panelists are much more qualified to talk about the technologies. What I wanted to highlight is sort of the regulatory pathway and how the industry has interacted with regulators across this time. I would suggest to you back in the passive era that the approach was a compliance approach. So we developed technologies, lots of great research, but really the regulators regulated, the manufacturers complied. That mindset has shifted, I think, fairly dramatically. As we've moved from passive to active, you see much more collaboration, much more technology leadership, and a place where the regulators and the suppliers and the manufacturers are thinking together about how to solve problems. And as you go from compliance to collaboration, as we've gone from passive to active, as we go from connected into autonomous, you're now seeing technology leadership. And you're seeing technology companies, suppliers, manufacturers, and others, really in many ways ahead of regulators. And this raises some very interesting questions, which we'll talk about in a moment. Up at the top, you'll also see that the regulators have changed and they're evolving. You know, we're all familiar, those of us in the industry, with NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and with DOT and others at the federal level. Increasingly, you're seeing, especially as we get into the connected car realm, one of the most important regulators is going to be whom? The FCC. Why? Because connected cars are going to have to function in the spectrum environment. And you'll also see increasing state focus, not only with regard to the data that we heard spoken about, the extraordinary amounts of data that the vehicle is producing, but also in terms of the regulation of autonomous vehicles. The interesting fact about autonomous vehicles is, in some ways, they're already being regulated today, but not at the federal level. They're being regulated right now at the state level. 4 states in the District of Columbia have already either established regulation or passed laws to regulate autonomous vehicles. Here's the interesting question, and John raised it. Well, what is an autonomous vehicle? And would a state regulating autonomous vehicles now be actually stifling innovation and development? It's an interesting question. So this sort of intersection or connection between regulation and technology, or public policy and technology, is very, very important for us to understand. I want to just sort of give you a little bit of, again, you know, a little bit of a personal sort of perspective for me. I was in the auto industry for 15 years, primarily in the public policy space, but also corporate strategy, labor relations, and other things. And I stepped away for 4 years to do private equity. Just during those 4 years, these regulations went into effect. Just in the 4 years, I looked away. No pun intended. I looked away from the road for 4 years, so I know it's a long time. And these things took place, right? So these are regulations that have been put in place. Now, in many cases, these regulations were put in place again after auto companies developed technology, put it in the marketplace, and regulators said, hey, that's a pretty good idea, that electronic stability control. It really makes a big difference. But just to give you a perspective, this is just in the last 4 years or so. And then, of course, you heard a ton of this already. This is technology leadership. And again, John talked a lot about this from General Motors' perspective, and you'll hear, I'm sure you'll hear more about that in the Q&A. Again, technology leadership ahead of regulation. I want to focus for a minute on vehicle-to-vehicle communications. And the reason I want to do this is I think it's an interesting case study in the intersection between vehicle safety technology and regulation. So what is vehicle-to-vehicle communications? John touched on it earlier. Just in a nutshell, it's the ability for cars to communicate using spectrum, right? So DSRC technology, so not just the sensors, cameras, radar that allows vehicles that can see each other to communicate, but the technologies that allows vehicles in outside the visual frame to see each other, communicate with each other. So an example is a car is driving north, it's sending signals, data, 10 times a second. I'm this fast, I'm this heavy, I have this many occupants, I'm going this direction. There's a car going east, it's saying the same thing. I'm going this fast, I'm this heavy, I have this many people in it. Those vehicles are communicating with one another. That's what we're talking about. That kind of communication enables an enormous amount of safety life-saving technology applications. NHTSA has stated that 80% of highway crashes can be addressed through the deployment of this technology. That's an enormous prize. So certainly life-saving opportunity, but also opportunities to save time, save fuel, help the environment as well, right? We can be more efficient. Again, John talked about a lot of these technologies. It's a huge opportunity, right? Why am I spending time on this, especially as the policy guy? Since 1999, the FCC granted a piece of spectrum, a piece of real estate in the spectrum, to the automakers through the Intelligent Transportation Systems of America to research in this space and develop and ultimately deploy in this space. It's terrific. It's outstanding. There's a pilot program that General Motors, I believe, is participating in, and among others, in Ann Arbor, 3,000 vehicles are on the road. Real-life stuff. We have an absolute near-term opportunity to do great things. Here's the problem. That spectrum, when these companies are ready to deploy, may not be available. Policymakers may make a different decision. They may decide that little piece of spectrum you guys had up at the 5.9 gigahertz band, maybe it's better used for unlicensed Wi-Fi users. I mean, there's a tremendous data crunch going on. We gotta, we need this stuff. So again, these decisions are happening right now. FCC is considering this right now. Members of Congress are trying to make a determination about whether the FCC will make the right decision or not right now. So again, regulatory decisions will have an absolute impact on the ability to deploy technology and therefore save lives, save time, save fuel. So just one example about why we have to keep in mind how the regulatory environment is developing along with the technology environment. You heard this already, you've seen it already with a lot sexier slides. I just stole a DOT slide. Again, I'm a kind of a former government guy, so I take government stuff. The reason I put this up was these are just an example of the kinds of applications the agency sees. Look at the value. This is what you do. This is what you can produce. This is how they dimension the prize, right? Here are all the applications: red light violation warnings, curve speed warnings, emergency electric brake lights, blind spot, lane change warning. All these things are connected vehicle applications. You've heard them described in the autonomous vehicle context. Imagine when the vehicles are networked. Imagine when the vehicles that can't see each other can communicate with each other. There's an enormous, as I said, an enormous prize right within our grasp. And we have to make sure we're mindful of the choices that regulators are making, the choices that policymakers are making. And to my mind, sharing that piece of automotive spectrum might be a gamble. So let me just sum up. Very complicated intersection between public policy and safety technology. It gets more complicated all the time. We're dealing with different regulators. We're dealing with different policymakers. We need to continue to work together on this. There's no question you heard today that when I say automakers, I include the Autolivs of the world and the Denzos of the world and the Bosches. We do have, by the way, large supplier integrators in our trade association because companies like Denso and Bosch and Delphi, they want to be part of the automotive discussion. They want to be at the table with the automakers, not just where they already are, where the technology is being developed, but increasingly where the policy discussion is being had. And then, finally, just to sum up, we absolutely need to be working together. It's bigger than one company, and frankly, it's bigger than one industry. We need to get the policymakers engaged. And with that, I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you very much.